We're going to see something a little bit more complicated now. So, ladies and gentlemen, please, absolute wall of noise, screaming excitement, it's Sarah Snell-Pym!
Still too tall.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Do you want me to bring it down a bit more?
Just a little bit.
I think I didn't want to underestimate, because that's offensive.
Yep, that's fine. I can actually see my writing. Okay, this is Ada Lovelace.
Snell-Pym and Ada Lovelace, ladies and gentlemen.